Welcome to the Faith Flex Podcast, your sanctuary for soulful exploration and practical wisdom, where spiritual growth joins together with the hustle of daily life. I'm your host, Monica Roxanne. I'm so glad you decided to join me and countless others because this is your moment for reflection, for growth, for real life change. Whether you're seeking a whisper of inspiration or a robust blueprint for action, the Faith Flex podcast stands as a testament to the daring spirit within all of us. So, to my pursuers and my dreamers, to my doers and believers, our journey awaits. Welcome. Hello, fam, and welcome to another episode of the Faith Flex podcast. I'm your girl, your host, Monica Roxanne, and I'm so glad you decided to join me and countless others this week as we bridge the gap between faith-based principles and practical living. This week, we're going to dive into the topic, cultivating compassion in challenging times. So why is that important? Because we're going through some challenging times. And so we know that when things get a little tough, oftentimes it tends to really bring out the true character of a person. And I think it's really important that we understand that compassion and empathy and kindness and patience is really important in a series of changing landscapes and uncertainty, especially in 2024. So I want to start with Colossians chapter 3, verse 12. And of course, you guys know my favorite version of the Bible is New American Standard Bible. And it says, "So as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." And then verse 13 basically goes on because there's a comma right after patience. In verse 12, it says, "Bearing with one another and forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so must you do also." I think I want to focus on just verse 12 and the attributes of how to cultivate compassion in times of challenge and uncertainty, and what it means to put on a heart of compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. And so in research of this particular topic, I came across an amazing book called The Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. If you are an advocate for understanding humanity and emotional intelligence and relational intelligence, she is the expert in approaching life in a practical way. And what she says, because one of the things I was researching is, what is compassion? What's the true definition of compassion? And there are a plethora of perspectives on what is compassion, some being just using emotional perspective or feeling sorry for someone. But she gave a very comprehensive definition of compassion, and I want to share that here. And she says, compassion is the daily practice of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity so that we treat ourselves and others with loving kindness, and we take action in the face of suffering. So I want to repeat that. She says, compassion is the daily practice of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity so that we treat ourselves and others with loving kindness, and we take action in the face of suffering. And I want to highlight the word recognizing and accepting, because I believe in this space, we are disconnected from understanding the true meaning of suffering. And there's this self-reference of us from time to time where we want to fix everything for everybody. And it's for self-edification, but not necessarily recognizing that there is a shared space of humanity and that it really requires us to just treat each other with loving and kindness. So I think we need to take a really good look at how do we approach compassion, and why do we need compassion, and why is compassion necessary? And so compassion allows us to make meaningful connections with others. And the Bible is clear about that. He talks about in Matthew's that when he saw a disarray, he was moved with compassion. And that particular scripture is Matthew 9:36. And it says, but when he saw the multitude, he was moved with compassion for them because they were distressed and scattered as sheep not having a shepherd. I think that's where we are in 2024, right? It's the world as a whole it's scattered, it's divided. And unfortunately, we're even more divided in the church or in the body of Christ because of our own individual interpretations or perspectives. But where is the compassion? The reason Christ came to the earth is out of love and compassion for humanity. And if we say we are Christ-like, I believe it's our responsibility to also practice compassion for one another, even though we may not look the same, we may not worship the same, we may not have the same type of job, we may not have the same type of traditional practices or beliefs or culture. There should be compassion in us, and we should be willing and offering compassion no matter the landscape. Now, that compassion does not usurp or dismiss accountability and responsibility, but compassion does allow us to make meaningful connections with others without taking on their issues on your own. And so in moments ago, I stated about people being compassionate, and it's really about self-edification. And I've seen that often where there are some compassionate people in the world, but then in the midst of trying to nurture the level of compassion in that situation, it becomes all about them. So at first there's an issue and there's a situation either involving people or a circumstance. And then the person that it feels led to lead the charge of fixing or guiding someone or the situation into a better space, it turns around and you're like, wait, this is all about you. They're glorifying themselves. They're edifying themselves. They're not necessarily listening to the cause or the effect of what's going on. And it becomes a self-edifying place. And yet the overviewing or the overarching theme is, I'm just compassionate. And being compassionate has nothing to do with taking on someone else's issues or you inserting yourself into a person's issue. So it's extremely important that we look at Matthew chapter 9, verse 36, when he said he saw it, he was moved into compassion because he saw that there were some challenges going on and they looked stressed and they were in a disarray. And I think we are in a season where we just don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. Some of us are challenged in our homes. Some of us are challenged in our finances. Some are challenged in a relationship. In the presence of someone going through and you want to show compassion, I think the very first thing is to really recognize that a person's going through, and that we all are, and then accept the fact that this is a shared space. So it's not about you. It's not all about them. It's a shared space. And if we're not in a season of challenge, remember when you were, and remember what it felt like when someone was truly compassionate to you. And then when someone was probably trying to be compassionate, but they lack the understanding of what that really meant and how that made you feel. There are challenges everywhere, challenges in our mental state, challenges in our health, challenges in our finances, challenges in the political landscape, challenges in our economy, where food prices are increasing and resources are diminishing or reducing. And then there's global crisis, and we're trying to figure out how the world as a whole is trying to figure out, how do I show compassion and support across the continent or to another country when right here in our own space, we're struggling and it does not seem that we can find a common ground. I wanted to give a different perspective here as well, is that when we're talking about compassion, there are some ways that we can actually cultivate compassion. And cultivating something means to develop, right? I want to approach from this perspective. One of the ways that we can to cultivate or develop compassion, either in the community that we're in or for our own self, is to use a tool called empathy. Now, being empathetic is not a attribute on its own. It's a part of compassion. And what do I mean by that? So the definition of empathy is to understand what someone is experiencing and to reflect back that understanding. So remember, I said earlier that the definition that the author Brene Brown stated that what is compassion is compassion is a daily practice of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity. But she goes on to say that empathy is a tool of compassion. And empathy is really about understanding what someone is experiencing and then taking the understanding and reflecting it back, meaning that you're not inserting yourself into their space, but you're saying, I do understand, and listen to their challenge, and then have create a space where there can be dialogue on either the resolution or understanding how we got here. When we use empathy, it helps us to create a sense of understanding. So again, empathy is not about feeling sorry and putting yourself in their shoes. Empathy is about understanding that experience or understanding that moment or even using empathy for yourself and acknowledging where you are and understanding where you are as a person. And again, when we look at compassion is often in the Bible compared to or coupled with mercy. And I dare to say that mercy is a part of empathy, because in order for our God to be merciful, he tends to know what's going on in the background and he graces us mercy. But there's mercy and compassion. And so again, having empathy or using the tool empathy, it's about understanding the person's experience and reflecting back on that understanding. I want to make sure I'm clear here that we do not insert ourselves in this space. It takes a growth and a level of maturity to say, I get it. I can tell you so many stories, but telling these stories may not be the best thing because the person or persons or circumstance may not require that. And it may require us just to listen. And again, using compassion means I'm recognizing, I acknowledge it, also accepting what's going on with our humanity. And that also compassion plays in every aspect of our lives. It plays into racism, right? It plays into sexism. It plays into gender and religion have for other people. And again, that doesn't mean that we may share the same perspective or belief. It doesn't mean that we walk in the same circles, but having compassion as a believer is a true example of being Christ-like, without ostracizing or dividing or inserting division among people, culture, religions, or perspectives or thoughts. It is our job to be compassionate. And in this season, in challenging times, it's a daily practice. And some days it's hard. We don't want to be like, listen, this is too much going on. And again, that requires growth, right? Compassion is a daily practice. It's not a one and done. It's not on Sundays only. It's not on Wednesdays only. It is a daily practice. And so when you partner that with empathy, we're starting to get a full picture. It's an understanding of what someone is experiencing and having the ability to reflect it back and in that understanding by recognizing and accepting that our shared humanity, so that we can treat each other with kindness and ourselves. Remember, you got to add yourself into this practice. And so I want to lead us into the next part of this. The author, Brene Brown, she goes on and she says that we can respond empathetically only if we're willing to be present, to someone's pain, meaning we understand what they're experiencing. It is important that we understand what people are experiencing. And so in my research for this podcast this week, some of the researchers that I came across, they said compassion literally means to suffer together. And so with that being one of the many bases of compassion, it's saying that we are understanding, using empathy, we are understanding what's going on, and either with ourselves, have empathy with yourself, saying, you know what, I know today is tough. I understand why we're here. I understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling, but we're going to get through this. And so when we can respond empathetically, only if we're willing to be present in someone's pain. So how do we do that, right? How do we show compassion, or show empathy, and then cultivate compassion in a challenging time or during challenging times? And the first step I beg to approach is to be open-minded. We may have to change our perspective as we listen and begin to understand the experience. Some of that may challenge our perspective, and we have to be okay with saying, you know, I don't know if I'm fully engaged with that approach. However, I'm willing to consider, or at least understand more of what's going on. And sometimes it allows you to maintain your perspective. But the first way of really trying to cultivate, meaning to cultivate compassion in challenging times, is really being open-minded. And your first step is to listen, and to listen thoroughly, not to fix, but to just listen for understanding. The second way that you can cultivate, and you and I can cultivate compassion, is to be empathetic. It is really important that we are empathetic in spaces, and I've already given that definition again, is to understand someone. So be intentional about understanding a person's view and experience. So the first step is to be open-minded. Be open-minded. The second step is to be empathetic, is to be intentional about understanding a person's view and experience. The third, which I think is the most important here, which we as believers tend to get a little dicey, is we have to stop inserting ourselves or passing judgment based on your own, or based on our own scale of acceptance. In order to cultivate compassion or develop compassion, we have to stop inserting ourselves in someone's situation that we were not invited into, understanding and knowing the difference, or passing judgment, some type of measuring matrix based on your own personal preference. Again, go back into step number one. That means to be open-minded. But for some of us, we are thinking we're being compassionate and we're showing compassion. But as many of us have probably experienced, you're like, wait, I'm going through it, but you're sure is making it all about you. Stop inserting yourself. Stop looking for a place of validation. This is not the moment to look for validation. This is the moment to cultivate love and kindness and patience, because when someone is going through, or there's a challenging time like we are in the world right now the negativity is on 100. We need to start developing a space of compassion and empathy. And the fourth thing is to practice loving kindness, gentleness, and patience without people pleasing. Now, so step number 3 are for those who are active and they're ambitious and they're go-getters. You know, we tend to insert ourselves. We don't mean it, but that's who we are because we're fixing things. We're fixers. Or for some of us who have yet to develop some form of flexibility, we tend to pass judgment on people based on our own scale of acceptance. So what we think is acceptable, and someone's not meeting it, or they're going through an experience, we're thinking, oh, that's your fault. That's your problem. Oh, well. And that's not okay. So step number 4 says, practice loving kindness, gentleness, and patience without people pleasing. This when you're cultivating compassion during a challenging time, a situation or experience, it's not about you. It's about the person or the circumstance. It has nothing to do with pleasing other people. And sometimes those conversations, when you're being compassionate, but you have to have tough conversations or important conversations, they may not be all kind. They may be a little tough or tough love, but again, it's not about you. It's about the person or the circumstance. So I'm going to go back through those steps, and hopefully we can utilize them this week. And that is step number 1, be open-minded. Remember that listening and understanding someone's circumstance or experience may change your perspective. Be open to that, because all that does is allows us to grow and mature. Number 2 is to be empathetic. And that's to be intentional about understanding a person's view and experience. Remember that empathy has nothing to do about feeling sorry. It has everything to do about understanding. Step number 3 is that you stop inserting yourself. We have to stop that and understand that let me listen so I can gain understanding. And and also not to pass judgment based on your scale of acceptance. Just because my scale of acceptance may be different from someone else. But if you're trying to be compassionate, all of that goes out the door. It's all about loving and kindness and healing, which brings me to step 4, is practicing loving kindness, gentleness, and patience without people pleasing. So listen, you guys, I hope this short 20 minutes or so has been a blessing to you, talking about cultivating compassion in challenging times. So remember to be very careful not to diminish someone's pain when you're trying to be compassionate. So I'm going to say it again. Remember to be very careful that we do not diminish someone's pain when you're trying to be compassionate. Pain and grief may not be like yours, but it's still tangible. And I think we can use this statement for every single thing that's going on right now in 2024, is that we have to stop diminishing each other's experiences, where we are in our living in our practical space. And I believe that our faith walk has nothing to do with diminishing or measuring between who's holy and more righteous. It had everything to do with being compassionate. Christ came to this earth to die for our sins out of love and compassion. And so I believe if we stop diminishing someone's pain, and making sure that that we are trying to be understanding of where they are, and then offer genuine love and kindness, we can definitely cultivate compassion during these trying times. So some of you are asking why we're talking about cultivating compassion in challenging times, and that is faith is defined as a belief held in strong conviction. Compassion is important to this faith, to the faith of Christ, to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he wanted us to be compassionate to our brothers and sisters. And so I want to end this podcast with this particular quote by Brené Brown from her book. Compassion is fueled by understanding and accepting that we're all made of strength and struggle. It's a practice based in the beauty and pain of shared humanity. So listen, if you're doing nothing else this week, think about how you can be more compassionate and how we can connect with one another. Because again, compassion allows us to have meaningful connection, and we need more of that in today's society. Thank you so much for choosing to hang out with me today. If you are looking for more insightful or in-depth thoughts on compassionate empathy, please check out the book Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. She's amazing. And then join me next week for a new episode. So until next time, thanks everybody. And that's a wrap on today's soul-stirring episode of the Faith Flex podcast. I hope you're leaving feeling uplifted and equipped to turn your everyday experience into stepping stones for spiritual growth and practical living. Thank you for tuning in and sharing your time with me. Be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a review if you enjoyed the journey today. Your support means the world to me, and it helps bring this message to more listeners who are searching for harmony between their spiritual walk and action. Until next time, remember to flex your faith.